Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's SAMAG seminar. Stand away from the speaker. My name is David Williams, and I'm a member of the SAMAG committee. SAMAG, as you would all know, runs a monthly series of seminars on a range of topics pertaining to the arts very broadly across different industry sectors. Tonight we're going to look at arts and well-being, which again is a very broad and very meaty topic. I'd just like to acknowledge that we're gathering together on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And I'd like to hand over now to the chair of tonight's panel discussion, Daniel Potter.
Hello, good evening. I am Daniel Potter. Thank you, David. I'm the CEO of Shopfront Arts Co-op, which is a youth arts organisation in southern Sydney. I have a production background, which is why this topic is quite interesting to me. With us tonight we have, I'll go from the other end, Sonia Lindsay, who is the Executive Director of HR at the Arts Centre in Melbourne, Tracy Margison, Project Coordinator for the Arts Wellbeing Collective, Felicity Castagna, like lasagna. That's how she explained to say her name. And notably winning the Prime Minister's Literary Award in 2014 for The Incredible Here and Now. And the inimitable Jo Dyer, who is the CEO of Sydney Writers' Festival and in her spare time produces award-winning films, most recently Girl Asleep. I think we're just going to start with a quick introduction from these people and they can tell you why they're here. We'll start from that end.
Oh, thanks. My name's Sonia Lindsay and I bring you greetings from Melbourne where it is freezing and you guys have the audacity to be wearing coats at the moment. It just absolutely blew my mind. So just to tell you a little bit about myself and why we're here today. As you know, I'm Executive Director of HR at Arts Centre Melbourne, which means that I look after all things to do with people. And people have been the delight and bane of my existence for about 20 years now. Consciously so, anyway. My background is actually in industrial relations. I worked at Victoria Police for the beautiful Christine Nixon for over 10 years. And I also have a background with the Victorian Equal Opportunity and Human Rights Commission as well. As a person of colour, I feel very strongly my position as someone who sits on the executive of Arts Centre Melbourne. And I feel very strongly to my position as someone in the arts community, given that I come from a family who have never been to a show. I come from a family who have no desire to go to a show. And day to day, what I do is motivate and work with and help to manage managers to bring the best out of people who live for shows. And that contradiction is not lost on me in any way. And in fact, it's the ambiguity that I actually find really interesting and quite delightful at times. My particular interest in terms of being here tonight is around probably two words that will come up a little bit. One is to do with values, and the other is to do with diversity. Both values and diversity for me are key to creating productive, creative people. Well-being for me is not just a feel-good exercise. It's not about people just smiling and being happy in their work. As someone who goes to Fair Work Australia, who negotiates with unions, who has terminated lots of people in their employment and may be known as Darth Vader in some circles, I also feel very strongly about the fact that values needs to drive behaviour and diversity leads to increased creativity and therefore increased productivity. And one of the things that I'm particularly interested in is actually conflict, which I really enjoy. Creative conflict is an amazing thing to experience. And I think as an industry, it tends to be something that we do really poorly and is often associated with negative outcomes instead of with the positive that diversity enables with it. So, Tracy.
Hi everyone, I'm Tracy Margison and I work at Arts Centre Melbourne with the wonderful, wonderful role of project coordinating the Arts Wellbeing Collective, which is a project that we launched in February this year, and we're just in the pilot stage of that program. And I'm sure it's going to come up again, so I won't go on about it now. I started at Arts Centre Melbourne in September. Is that mine? And prior to that role, I was the Marketing and Development Manager at Gasworks Arts Park in Port Melbourne. My background is broadly in arts marketing, arts management. In my spare time, I'm the creative manager for Williamstown Literary Festival, and I also have my own company with my partner that does independent producing and regional tour management. My particular interests for tonight, obviously coming from the Arts Wellbeing Collective as number one, but also when I actually saw that job come up to project coordinate this, it felt amazing. It felt like such a great fit and exactly what I wanted. But it was also a bit full circle because I initially participated in the Entertainment Assistant Victoria University report that was done into mental health and wellbeing in the entertainment industry. So that was quite a nice kind of link, and it's something that's been front of mind for me, having worked in the arts for quite some time. And I think anyone who's worked here for some time in this industry has seen people struggle in whatever shape and form that may take. And anyone who's worked as an arts manager has also been responsible for people's struggle and supporting them and getting them through. I'm loving this job. It's amazing, and I love this program a lot. And just turn off my mic if I keep talking about it, because I will go all night. And I suppose my particular interests in terms of this industry and this idea is marrying an industry where we're so invested in the product. This is we love it, we believe in it. Our creative output is so entwined with who we are and what we do, and we're not in it for the money, not usually, and how to pull that apart to be effective in your home and your work life, when what you do is your hobby as well. You know, when you leave work and you go back to work, and then you come home and then you go back to work and get writing, and then you wake up in the morning and you think, I've had another idea, and you write, and then you go to work, and there's no sort of moment where you're actually not at work sometimes. The other thing I'm extremely passionate about as well is mythology in the arts. I think we've got a lot to unpack. I passionately hate the ideas that some people say to me, but I have to have a mental health problem, otherwise I can't create. You know, I'm not depressed. How am I possibly going to do this? I don't have anxiety. And it's like, just the idea that you need to be unhealthy in order to be effective is one that really frightens me, and that I want to beat down with a baseball bat. And I think marrying all that up with a environment where we're highly collaborative, where we're living in each other's pockets, and where we're producing something that is epically deadline sensitive, whether you're ready or not, 2,000 people are walking into your theatre at 8 o'clock, can just create this melting pot of issues for wellbeing. So I love having these conversations, because the more conversations we have, hopefully the better it will get.
My name is Felicity Castagna. I wear many hats, like I'm sure a lot of people in this room. So I'm a novelist. I'm adapting my last novel to the stage. I have worked as a high school teacher. I've worked in community arts now in the western suburbs of Sydney, where I live for 7-8 years now. Worked on lots and lots of different community development programs. I do lots of teaching at Western Sydney University and a lot of writing centres. I teach creative writing workshops to everyone from little preschool kids up to adults. I got asked to come and talk today about motherhood and the arts, which in some ways I find kind of really ironic because I am the mother of a 4-year-old, or an almost to be 4-year-old, and a 3-month-old. But it's actually not something that I ever really talk about. I don't even really write female characters or characters that are mothers. I have a tendency to kind of hide pregnancies until the last minute when I say to my colleagues, oh, you know, by the way, I'm having a child in a couple of months. I'll just, you know, reschedule things like a little bit. And I think that that's probably because of my self-consciousness. You know, being a mother in the arts, I was I'm developing a play at the moment in a room with like 30 different creatives, actors, you know, costumers, lighting people, music people. And I realised that I was the only person there that was a parent other than one man who had grown children. So I think that probably some of my self-consciousness about that and probably my anxiety about being taken seriously as a mother in the arts probably comes from the fact that I work in a field where I just don't feel people reproduce. And that goes for academia, that goes for being an arts worker, and that goes for being a creative artist. Funnily enough, the most read thing I have ever written is the only one small thing that I have ever written on motherhood, which was an essay called Who Gives a Shit on Motherhood in the Arts. And that I wrote that because basically I got asked to write an essay for an arts magazine, and I couldn't think of anything to write, and someone suggested I wrote about motherhood. The last time somebody suggested I wrote about motherhood was when I was pregnant with my first child, and I was like incredibly offended at the insinuation that I might become some sort of mummy blogger or something. I was like, I'm a professional artist. Don't go there. I'm not going to be writing for, you know, Mamma Mia, what do you call it? Mamma Mia? Yeah, okay, see, I don't even know the name of these silly things. Anyway, I wrote this essay about how when I had my first child, you know, 2 weeks early, which was really inconvenient because I was about to finish editing a manuscript that was basically going to the printer. So I had a baby, and then I brought the manuscript to the hospital with me, and I finished it about 4 hours after I had a baby. I went through and I continued my and in retrospect, that seems a little bit mad, just slightly. But you know, lately, I have thought, particularly because of a lot of incidences in my life, that perhaps I need to be out as a mother, and perhaps I need to talk about, I'm kind of in motherhood, I'm in the closet. But lately I've been thinking maybe I do need to talk about this more. I've had a number of incidences lately where I've kind of confronted people in the arts with my motherhood because of various things that I felt weren't quite right, and it's gone a lot better than I thought. So we can talk about those later.
Thanks, Misty. So I find that very interesting, actually. Work-life balance, or as we were talking about earlier, is that a misnomer, or should we be talking about work-life integration? I find it interesting because my background, for 12 years I worked at Sydney Theatre Company, and it's interesting to me the way that in the arts your personal life can very often blur into your professional life and vice versa. And I think that's important to say, because how you then find a pathway to balance when what you're doing is both for passion and for love, and also for pay and for a professional career. And some of that comes down to the stage in your life that you're at, and what you can do if you're a single person or if you're not a parent at that time, and the kind of consideration that you have for others, I think is also driven to some degree by your own status, and that's why I think it is important that more people come out as parents in the arts, both as producers, theatre makers and creators, because what you can achieve logistically changes when you become a parent, and how that is taken into account by employers or not taken into account by employers can be very important as to your capacity to go on to work and succeed in the field. So Sydney Theatre Company is a very interesting example that we can talk a bit about in this field, because, you know, as a theatre producer, you're going to see shows all the time, and you don't consider that work, but it is necessary to be successful, to know who's out there, to know who's the up-and-coming actors, directors, designers, all of those things. So somebody has to be doing it in your organisation, and I think the management's very lucky if you have young, passionate people who are prepared to do it on their own dime, as it were. I think an interesting thing, as Dan said, I have been an independent producer before I went to the Writers' Festival, and I find it very interesting. I found it very interesting to confront the difference in being within an organisation and working freelance, and it gave me a lot more insight into the lives of all of the people with whom I've been working for many years, like the artists principally, the uncertainty of their lives financially, which can bleed into so much else, and also often the isolation. When you're not in production, you can be living quite an isolated life, which obviously plays into some of the mental health issues that the Wellbeing Collective is now starting to address. So one last thing that I'll say, and then we can open it up to discussion, that is more a mental health issue than work-life balance issue, but I find interesting, and they're certainly related if separate issues, is the nature of creating art itself, and how that can often require particularly creative people, like the artists themselves, the ballistes, the actors, the directors, to sometimes go to dark places. And how, I mean, I think we saw on Q&A Neil Armfield talking about the conversation that he had with Ursula Jovich about when he was trying to persuade her to do Secret River, and whether or not that was a role that she wanted to take because of what she knew it would mean. I saw David Stratton's fantastic doco on Australian film and watched the aftermath of a couple of the scenes being shot in Rabbit Proof Fence for the young actors, and what it meant to have to act those scenes. And so how we can ask that of our artists, and then what support we need to put around it to ensure that they can, you know, not go under whilst doing it, I think is all important, and potentially also all expensive, which is another side of an often cash-strapped industry. So, yeah, that's
It's funny, when I started working in the arts, I used to think it was this kind of, I had this utopian idea of this perfect classless society where everything was ideal, and I very quickly learned that that wasn't the case. I know I'm putting you on the spot a little bit here, but I thought that that maybe you guys could tell us a little bit about the research that Entertainment Assist did and about the Arts and Wellbeing Collective, and kind of give us a bit of a lay of the land.
Yep, certainly. So the research that Entertainment Assist undertook, they commissioned Victoria University to do a study into the mental health of the entertainment industry broadly. So there've been several studies done specifically into perhaps musicians or actors, but there weren't many that went into production and management and dancers and crew and everybody. And so this was possibly a world first. Mark can correct me. Yes, world first. And it was a really revealing report. So, like, the key things that it talked about were rates of anxiety. Please don't quote me. I think rates of anxiety 10 times higher, rates of depression 5 times higher. Suicide ideation twice as high. Suicide ideation for roadies in particular was about 9 times as high. Just these massive numbers. It also looked into substance abuse and things like that. Yes, and we have a little booklet here. You can have a little glance at the statistics yourself rather than taking my word for it. So this research came out fairly recently, and put numbers to what I think we kind of anecdotally knew to be true. I don't think there were that many big surprises in there, but it also made some recommendations around things that could be done. And so the Arts Centre Melbourne has been working in partnership with Entertainment Assist to deliver this newest program, which is the Arts Wellbeing Collective. Would you like to do the spiel or me?
Okay. The Arts Wellbeing Collective is essentially formed through a consortium of arts agencies and organisations. We started off thinking, gee, if we got 15 it would be nice. I think we're up to 130. And we're actually about to take it on a bit of a roadshow around regional Victoria as well. Essentially, it's a program that we have developed with psychologists to look at issues at the earliest possible moment that will provide improved mental health outcomes for creative people. So that can be issues to do with shift work, poor diet, financial insecurity associated with being employed on a casual basis. It can be to do with things like financial literacy, mindfulness, the parameters and the boundaries between professional and personal behaviour. As has been alluded to, the whole idea of we all work together, we play together, we fight together, we make art together, which doesn't always mean that we behave well with each other. And the fact is, we are in workplaces and we have obligations under the OHS Act, and we have obligations to each other under equal opportunity law, and we just have obligations to each other. So with all of that happening, the Arts Wellbeing Collective has offered a range of programs. We have a website where all of our resources are free, they're all online. And particularly for the small to medium sector, it's been important because they don't have the resources of an HR department to help them. So we have things like template policies that are all up there. So if you want a policy on appropriate behaviours or bullying or return to work or whatever the case may be. And we work really closely with WorkSafe and with insurers as well. I guess the main thing to point out has been what has surprised us has been where the demand is. So we thought the demand was going to be around healthy lifestyles, work-life balance. It actually isn't. So for us in Victoria, the demand has been, how do you manage creative people? So we have been running a whole stack of sessions which basically take 24 hours to sell out, that are all about creative masterclasses in terms of how do you manage creative types? How do you manage creative personalities? How do you have a performance conversation with someone who you're probably going to have a drink with after work? How do you say, actually, I know you and we worked together on our last production, but you're not the best person for this job? How do you say, that comment that you made was actually inappropriate in a workplace context, and you don't get to say that? How do we say that just because you're creative and energetic and passionate, you don't get to torture other people, oh tortured artist? You don't get to bully people. That behaviour just doesn't happen here. And if we allow that to happen, what does that say about us as an industry? And what does that say about our art? Or does it not? So these are some very interesting questions that we've been looking at as part of the Arts Wellbeing Collective. And there's also been some work that continues to be done into areas for Indigenous people, for people with a range of very tailored needs when it comes to mental health issues.
Sonia, you just said something there which we talked about a little bit earlier, which was the tortured artist torturing everyone else. Does anyone else have anything to add? Because it sort of struck a chord when we were talking about it. No one has any. I'm just throwing grenades.
It's Like I never realised it until you actually said that phrase in an email. I was like, this is exactly what is exactly wrong with the community that we work in. I mean, it strikes me. I was thinking about it further. I thought, what is art, right? Like, art, whether or not you're a filmmaker, a writer, or a painter, art is about exploring the interior lives of others and showing them to people, and showing people that we can never really know each other, right? Because we can never really know what's going on inside each other's heads. So that's the job of the artist, to bring that out. But it strikes me that a lot of good artists forget that. They forget what makes good art practice, and then therefore they kind of forget what makes a good colleague or a good human being, essentially. So if we all kind of went back to what makes good art practice, which is to think very introspectively about the lives of others that we may not be able to see on the surface, then perhaps we could all be better colleagues to one another.
Yeah, absolutely. I really like that, and I think that's so true. With one of the challenges I think we have is that the art trumps all. So you can use any means to get the end result, and sometimes that can be very accepted. So you can be working with a horrible director, and every single person can complain about them. And the company can say, sorry, but he makes good shows and they all sell out. So you've got to have that support from the very top to go, just doesn't even matter. If you're going to be horrible, we're going to get rid of you.
I will jump in.
Go for it.
A slightly contrary position. I mean, I'm not suggesting that we tolerate bullying, but it is a conundrum, I think. I don't think it is straightforward to say that a very determined director who has a very singular focus on, getting what's out of his or her head and onto the stage can be a very fraught process. And that process you want the rehearsal room to buy into, but not every actor or crew member is going to have the same tolerance or resilience or even capacity and talent to do that easily. And I know that there have been situations in rehearsal rooms where some people have thrived and other people have really found individuals' process very difficult. And trying to mediate between that when you know the outcome that everybody shares is great art is not an easy thing to calibrate. And certainly there have been situations where there's sort of unanimity of a view that the director has overstepped the mark, and then absolutely mediation has occurred, and I think it's appropriate. And if actors want to bring in a union representative to be an independent party, then all of that, as far as I'm concerned, is fine. But I don't think this is the thing about making art. I don't think it's as straightforward, and I don't think HR policies can as easily be imposed always. And that's not to derogate from the work that's being done, or not to say that work environments shouldn't be safe places, but art's sometimes dangerous. So how do we then deal with that tension, creative or otherwise?
By learning how to have conflict. That's how we do it.
So I'm kind of interested in two questions that I had. The first sort of related to the sort of research that was done and the kind of anxiety. Like, I read some of that research and came out through the MEAA and was really kind of shocked and horrified at the level of anxiety and, suicidal tendencies and all of that, that kind of the anguish that appeared to be underwriting a creative sector was really distressing, I think, for everyone within it. But it seems to me that, and the uniformity of it, but coming from people who were working in so many different areas within it, and I just wondered if the way that the anxiety was being described from the roadies, for example, which is presumably kind of being on the road and isolated from family and friends, which would be different potentially from the financial insecurity that a jobbing actor may have. And is that those different sort of sources and touch points of anxiety, did that come through as well in that research?
Something that I think is interesting, I think that's a really great point that you make about the uniformity of the response. And I think that can also talk to, quite often when we have these conversations, we tend towards talking about actors. And I think we need to keep broadening, because I think there's investment throughout the sector. I think it would be naive to say that the publicist doesn't care about the art. They don't care if no one goes to the show. They don't care if it's a bad show. Of course they do. So I think sometimes when we talk about, I think the rehearsal room is like the most epic melting pot of personality and conflict and challenge. But I think sometimes the marketing department can have their share of big, fat, creative issues, and so can the lighting guys, and so can the stage managers, and sort of everyone's in on it. So I think that uniformity kind of really revealed to me, and I'm not like an academic and cannot interpret that data in the way that that an academic could. But I think that's what I took from it, is that real thing of going, don't forget how invested everybody is. And I think in terms of this program in particular, we've been tried to be quite rigorous in saying this is a program for everybody. You know, we employ food and beverage people, we employ visitor experience, we employ finance, accountants, general counsel. We come. We know you're invested, and I think that was a real value of the program, because people can tend to gravitate towards a section of the industry, but that's what I took from the research. I don't know if that was the intention, but I really felt that was something that really affected me, as going, I see it in my team, my previous team, that they care. They are up late, they are working till 1 o'clock if a show's not selling, because they care. So I think that's what I sort of took, in terms of there are obviously all sorts of different pressures. So of course the roadies did have particular pressures around just the hours and the strange hours that they work, I suppose, as well, and slightly different cultures around substance abuse and things like that. But for me, what I really took was the level of investment.
I mean, that's sort of, sorry, I think that, I guess, brings me back to kind of the point that I was making a little bit about the time of one's life. Are certain careers in the arts, and this is moving away a bit from the artists themselves, transitory? Are they suited to particular periods of your life, which might be when you have less dependence? Is there anything you can actually really do about the fact that if you're a roadie, you're on the road? As the saying suggests. And it comes back to when I was at Sydney Theatre Company, I come out as a mother too. I had a child who's now 5.5. And it would seem to me very difficult to do the job that I did if I'd had a child then. That's something to do with the childcare responsibilities that women particularly face, but it's also to do with, you do actually, a lot of parents want to see their child. And if you're working by day and then you're in the theatre by night, there's a very small window. And it doesn't seem surprising to me that a lot of artistic directors are older women or gay men without ongoing parenting responsibilities, and that time, in the time that they're in that role. And I think that's a sort of an interesting thing about the time in your life that you can devote to particular aspects of a creative career.
I was just going to say that, I think sometimes we can get hung up on the constraints that motherhood places on arts workers and artists. And to me, it should be obvious, although I've increasingly found it's not, that it should be obvious what those constraints are to people. It shouldn't even really need to be explained. But at the same time, I think that there's a lot of mental health benefits and a lot of benefits to your arts in being a parent and being a mother. A huge amount that I think we often need to be reminded of in this discussion. And one of the things it does for me is can consistently pull me out of the arts world, which I think is really good for your mental health. You know, like, so the fact that, and as an artist, the fact that motherhood forces me to be in spaces and to meet people that I would never meet, working within the arts world, it expands, I think, my repertoire as an artist, and I'm sure it would as well for someone who is purely an arts worker, not necessarily making art, would give you a better understanding of who's out there and the kind of audiences that you can bring in. And, you know, just the fact that it forces you to actually take time off. Because you have to. Like, I've never sat in the park for hours before I had kids. You know, and what a wonderful thing for any artist or a human being to do, and how much can that inform your art or your knowledge of the world and feed back into, you know, your practice as an arts manager?
Oh, look, absolutely. I think my comment is more about the sheer number of hours that and the after hours that you're working, and whether it's a head of development who has to be at the opera company shows 3 nights a week because they have so many donors that they can't fit them all into 2 shows, and so you're expected to be at the show and you're expected to schmooze. Or as a theatre, you know, as a kind of, I was the executive producer there, and so you had to know who was around, and so you were going to, you know, I tried to go to, obviously I went to every STC show, but not just to the STC show. I went to the first preview, I went to the opening night, I would check in halfway through the season and you'd go to closing, or if you didn't, you know, another one of your close colleagues did, and then you would go to Belvoir, and we try to go to Most Griffin, and then you wanted to stay across the independent sector because otherwise, you know, you're privileging the establishment. And just the sheer, and then, you know, I chaired Force Majeure, I used to work at Bangara, I have an interest in contemporary dance, so I'd go to that. You know, like, you just, before you know it, just to sort of feel that you're across the industry, the sheer number of shows to which you would go, it's sort of astronomical, and did gladly, like willingly, like loved it, like not complaining at all. But I think now, if I had Ez, my son, at that time, it would have been impossible. And in fact, the period that I was there, Robin Nevin was the artistic director, who's obviously, her parenting duties were behind her. And then Kate and Andrew came in, who were relatively young and had a very young family, and it was a very, not so much for Andrew, as he said, because he'd just stay by the bar anyway, but Kate would be, and you know, this comes to the point of motherhood, she would be rushing backwards and forwards, and if there was an opening night, you know, not the one she was in, but she'd be off to have dinner with the kids and then back, and so it's more, and that comes, I guess, down to the more traditional work-life balance questions, which is not to do, and I absolutely agree with you in terms of the creation of the art and the way that parenthood, and indeed just broad experience, and intense experience, which parenting certainly is, how that can feed into the art that's being made.
Or fit into your ability to manage time, like you say, you know, like Kate goes back and has dinner with the kids and goes back to the theatre, like, you know, what you can get done in that time, no other human being could do. Who doesn't, you know, have kids, like, your ability to, like, manage and compartmentalise time.
Certainly.
Becomes
waste
awesome.
Yeah.
Turning on the wire for a whole weekend.
Something that Felicity mentioned earlier that I think is really interesting is about other people in the arts not reproducing.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there's been any formal study on this as to whether that's true or whether it just kind of feels like that. Yeah, and something that I have no founding for as a theory is you often hear people talk about their art as their children. You know, so they've created something, they've put their heart and soul into it, they've put all their love into it, and then they send it out into the world for critique and for its own journey. And I don't know, there's some research paper in that, I'm sure, about whether that same journey of experience mimics motherhood in a way that changes people's, I don't know, desire or drive to have children in the same way. I don't know.
Just like people with dogs, you know, like, parenting out of something. No, I can totally understand that making art is like having a baby. Having always done kind of simultaneously, every time I have a baby, I come out with a new book.
I'm going to come out now as a parent. I have an almost 2-year-old child, and I have now realised how uncomplicated my life was before she existed. I think one of the things I want to point out is that as a dad who wants to be present, there's a similar issue, which is that I feel like as a guy, I can't say to my team, I need to be somewhere tonight, so I can't come to that show, or I can't finish writing this grant because actually I'm meant to be at a birthday party. I don't know. I don't know if there's anything to say there, but I feel like it needs to be.
Yeah, look, I now work at the Writers' Festival, which is very intense, but for a short period of time, and I don't think it's probably any coincidence that that's been my only full-time job since I had Airs. The only thing I can say that is I felt so guilty, as the perennial guilt, because I used to, at STC, I would get in about 9:30, sometimes 10. But I would stay until like some 7, 8 o'clock, and that was kind of normal. And that was even more than seeing a show, and then like go and see a show. But with Airs, so like childcare, it's at 6 o'clock, otherwise, they're at the police station by 10 o'clock. It's like quite a lot. There's no that. It's like your child at the police station. And I have to leave the Rocks by 5 o'clock to get, and he's at school now, but he's after his care school, so I have to leave the Rocks at 5 o'clock to be at his after school care by 10 to 6. That's already a really long day for a 5-year-old. And his father, my partner, picks him up a lot, and so we share that. But it's shared with me, and so I have to if I don't go, he's at the police station. So it's like quite clear. It's like the team know when I'm on Airs duty. It's often sad for me if I can't have the after work drink, but it just doesn't matter what has to be done. And I always thought, and then I'll get home and then I'll do another 2 hours. I really respect people who can do that, but once you're home and you've done the dinner and the bath and the story, the idea of then booting up Excel and doing next year's training or funding application is I cannot do it. So my work hours have really shrunk relative to what they were. I work a lot less hours. And I've felt for a long time, and still feel bad about that. But you just have to accept, hey, the board knew what they were getting when they employed me. And I also, as you say, occasionally have the odd extra project going on as well. So it has to be really quality time. So you have to be working harder, it feels, or at least not wasting the time. That's the thing, not sort of stuffing around as much.
Just
having the occasional pub lunch.
just to get back to the dad point as well. So at the moment, I've now got the second father of very young children working in my team, and we've made a big deal of celebrating, acknowledging, and talking about these are drop-off mornings. These are pick-up afternoons. These are school holidays that are no-goes. This is when your kid's sick and you need to be at home. And if anything, I'm probably much more vocal about it with the guys than with the women. And the reason is because it's all about role modelling.
Yep.
And it's really significant to do in any organisation.
Yep. School holidays. Every 8 weeks.
So much to look forward to. With all of that in mind that we've just covered, does that point to a lack of, or maybe not, arts people management in the industry? And to what extent is that tied to the restraints of companies, or is it just that we're young in that area, I guess?
I think I've been surprised at the immaturity in the industry when it comes to people management. I've worked across quite a few sectors and I've been very surprised about that, because you've generally got a population, a demographic of highly intelligent, very reflective, quite well educated people, and yet when it comes to managing each other, not so good. Okay, for a whole range of reasons which we've sort of covered off here. And, you know, in some ways, so I remember probably about 15 years ago, I was doing some work in terms of a culture study with a large group of forensic scientists. And it was fascinating actually watching and being part of that analysis around their communication, their styles around confrontation, how they actually managed employees and they managed work, and I just found them completely bizarre. And in its own special way, so are we in the arts, for a whole stack of other reasons. And it's not to do with, you know, our ability to compartmentalise like it was with the forensic scientists. It's probably to do with our capacity to express ourselves. It's to do with our lack of inhibition. It can be to do with our almost zealot-like passion. And some of those things you see replicated across into other industries. So I've seen very similar types of behaviours, for instance, with social workers who are zealots and advocates and are always working, are always on, they never stop. You actually see a not dissimilar thing with some nurses in intensive care. So I think there are other models of industry that are worth us looking at to go, who else works in similar types of situations? And what can we learn in terms of management maturity from them to be able to help us in our own practice?
Absolutely. And I think to compound that, and this is very common across a lot of industries, is promoting people with excellent technical skills and not giving them the support to become really good people managers. So the person who gets the head of lighting is the best lighting designer. They might not necessarily be the best manager of a group of lighting designers. And that's fine. That's our responsibility to make sure that that person is equipped to be an effective manager. And I think that sounds like it's something that would happen everywhere, where you get promoted with technical skills and then they'd have to build soft skills and so on. So it's just one to throw in the mix, I suppose.
And maybe if I just give one example of something that I actually threw at a group this morning and they looked a little disconcerted. So I like disconcerting people. So just have a look at the person sitting next to you. Just have a look at them. The person sitting next to you, just eyeball to eyeball. Okay. Now, it's actually easier to do this to a stranger than to someone you know. I won't get you to do this, but I will get you to think about what it would feel like to do it. And I'm going to do it to Tracy because I always pick on her. So I'm going to say, Tracy, can we catch up sometime next week? Because I'd like to talk to you about some work that you've done recently. I haven't really been very happy with what you've done. It wasn't very timely, and I thought the accuracy issue was actually suffering there too. I don't know if there's anything going on for you that you might want to talk to me about, or if there's anything I can do to support you, but I do need to have a conversation with you about your performance next week.
She does this a lot. As examples.
We will have that conversation. So think about what that is like in your industry to have that level of confidence, honesty, and trust to actually be able to do that with a colleague, with a peer, with someone who works to you, or even managing up. Imagine what that would be like. And when you think about that and how profound that actually feels, when you don't have those conversations, okay, so let's say you don't ever have those conversations, think about the levels of resentment, anger, overwork for other people that happens because you have to compensate for someone who's actually not pulling their weight, bitchiness, rumours, all of the things that you would prefer to do rather than have that conversation. So when we talk about people management, that's what we're talking about in the arts.
I actually did this for the first time ever, like a few weeks ago, and it really changed my, like, usually someone pisses me off and, or like I don't feel like they're getting where I'm coming from, and I just kind of go home and feel mad. You know, or, you know, sometimes it's really hurtful, I'll just go home and, you know, cry and have a glass of wine. And it was an incident in which, like, I'm working on a production and I have to leave early because I have to get my kids. And a very young man made a comment about the fact that I leave early, like basically kind of implied that I don't work as hard. And it really upset me. When he said it to me, I said, oh, okay, I'm sorry, which is like my first default, like I apologised. Said I'll try to work on that, and went home and then was just so angry all night. And a friend of mine was like, look, he's got no idea what you do he's young, he lives with his mum. Like, she probably does his laundry and cooks him dinner. Like, you know, like, he'd have no idea what you do every day. And so I actually, like, I for the first time ever, like, I went back and was like, I told him my schedule for the day. And he just sat and he listened, and then, you know, the next day he came and he apologised, and he was really genuine in his apology. And he wouldn't, like, and he did say, like, I just didn't understand, like, I was like, I need you to, like, in a really non-confrontational way, I need you to know what I do every day. Like, I need you to know what my schedule is in order to be here. Yeah. I need you to understand that I get up at like 4 so that I can do the writing that I need to do for today. Before I, you know, my son wakes up with like poo on his head, which every parent, like, if you're a parent, you understand like the physics of that and how it can't really happen to anybody else but a baby, but it happens. And, you know, and then I do, you know, so I've got to clean him, and then I've got to go to like 2 different like childcare places. And then I've actually got to I've got to go home after that and take a shower because it's too hard for me to take a shower before I get the kids out of the house. And then, you know, I have to come here and blah, blah, blah. And he's like, I had no idea that that's what you would do every day. And I was like, well, that's what I do every day. And I just felt so much better. And he's less confrontational, and now we're good mates, you know? So it's, yeah, it was good. Like, it was the first time I really tried that, like, let's just be honest and talk to one another. And it was really life-changing, actually.
It's hard because it does sound so simple, where you just go for honesty, transparency, you know, vulnerability if you can, which is a frightening thing. And yeah, it's. I mean, most of us would rather chop off our arm than do it.
Like this young man whose washing is being done by his mother, to not of his own volition think what it might be like for someone who has 2 kids and, you know, just, it's male privilege, right?
That's a whole other conversation, Joe. We should probably open up to the floor if anyone has any burning questions at this point. Is anyone ready? Do you need some time? I could ask another one. No, there's one right there.
It's more of a comment, but I'm kind of interested in the idea, in this example of you know, what would you say to somebody in a rehearsal room, in a painting studio? Like, I'm curious about how that adapts into the kind of scenarios, because I think there's also a little bit of an assumption in the conversation so far that the workplace is an office.
Yeah.
And one of my bugbears, and it's huge, is that the differentiation between the creative world and the industry that has only grown in the last 30 years or so, which is a bureaucratisation of the arts, which has borrowed from a whole lot of other industries and has not really adapted. And so that's one point. And then the other point I'd really like to make is that while I completely understand the kind of complexity and the slightly derogatory terminology around the tortured artist, the fact that we are titillated, obsessed, inspired by trauma, and that actually that trauma is the thing that is kind of abundant and then passed on to other people. I just wonder whether that's a better term.
So maybe just to take that first point, and I really wish you could come down to Melbourne. We've got a great session coming up on the Creative People Management course. So if you think of it from the perspective of first principles, think about the principle, the language can be changed. So, the language is just the code that you use for whoever's there. So if we're sitting in a room and there's mainly, accountants and IT people and, there will be a certain language you can use. But the actual first principles are the same.
Except that in that dynamic, you're assuming a hierarchy that is not necessary.
No. So, no, and the reason being because what this does, so in that example I did, because I was talking to Tracy as a manager, but the other examples that we use is to make sure that there's a safety, and even if there's a scaffolding for a script, if you like, around peer-to-peer communication, around even artist-to-audience communication, because effectively what you're doing is you're just wanting to share how you feel and what you think and provide some space for a response and to be as vulnerable as you can with that. Now, in an office scenario, you're wanting to say, how can I support you to do this differently? But effectively, because of the employment contract, these are my expectations for what you do. So that's why the language is different. But the language changes so that you can actually do that peer-to-peer.
I think the key too is that it's around feedback. I mean, we actually have quite formal feedback mechanisms sometimes in the rehearsal room. We have notes, that's quite an amazing thing. Like imagine if we did that at the end of every office day. If we went, hey, at lunch, what you made? It really, it is direct to actor. Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that again that principle is the same. So I think it's that thing of, like Felicity says, the second something happens to you and you kind of catalogue it, and then there's this moment where you go, hey, stage manager, you know what? And you rattle off 50 things that they've done in the past 2 weeks that have really gotten to you. And it's like, if each time they did something, if each time they kind of slammed the door to your dressing room, you just sort of went, hey, mate, can you not do that? It's making me feel this way. Like just those, I think that's kind of the principles that we sort of, and again, we're sort of like shrinking about 4 hours of stuff into 30 seconds. But I think the idea for us is around building those principles of speed, feedback, communication, and also breaking down some of the assumptions that can happen, I think. You all hear of the terrible manager or whoever who goes, you were late again because you're lazy, rather than you were late again, are you okay? Where it's sort of about breaking down some of those assumptions of, oh, Felicity always leaves early, she's such a, so lazy. And you go, no. And again, it's cutting through and going, hang on a second, here's how my day looks. Lazy is not a word that we're going to bring into this lexicon. So I think it's, in terms of that sort of transferability, those key takeaways for me are around the feedback, the transparency, and the speed. The try and nip it in the bud, and hopefully that does stop us getting to those points where you do have potentially destructive conversations that do really build. And I think too there's also, like, the rehearsal room is also just another kind of office. People are late and people, all those issues can still come out that happen in an office or in a loading dock. I'm less familiar with the visual arts. I think that there's other issues in the visual arts around isolation and solo work and things like that. But one of the reasons we did look to the performing arts, not only because that's Arts Centre Melbourne's remit as we do performing arts, but also because it is unusual in just the constant level of collaboration. And I think collaboration is feedback. So giving people the skills to effectively deliver really good feedback, no matter who you're talking to, that's something that we hope that this program will really be able to do.
So if you're about this program and the general kind of discussion about well-being and balance in the workplace, if you're in a workplace where you're not particularly supported and you're not within a position of power, how is that? How can you address that with somebody who may be your superior? Mm-hmm. And you're not happy with how you're being treated or that there's...
So I can give you some general principles, but let's talk after. Because that's where the real conversation will happen. It's like any power dynamic. It's going to be around how comfortable you feel confronting a monster and how much support and preparation you can get and be given in order to feel supported yourself, to know what your rights and obligations are and what their rights and obligations are. So I'll talk you through afterward, but the other thing is to be very clear around what the impact is to you as an individual. So there's a difference between this feels uncomfortable and I can move through it because of the things I'm going to learn, compared to this is actually starting to erode who I am.
I would be really interested to know if you have scripts and resources around those sorts of
Yes.
Artist to artist. I come from a position where I am an artist who created an arts company in order to provide opportunities for artists on my level. And that threw me into a position where I'm having to manage where I never had to manage before. And a lot of them are my colleagues from previous productions or friends. And a lot of them are auditioning for me, and I'm having to be in a position where I have to turn people down for positions when they are on equal or even better level as me as an artist. And I hate conflict. And I think over the last 3 years of doing it, I've learned a lot of how to do it and how to do it better, but I'm still not great at approaching it without a lot of anxiety. So I would really like to.
So we do certainly have resources on the website, so have a look and help yourself to whatever works.
We do have more coming, so just to jump in on the scripts specifically, we're doing some work on that at the moment, of adapting some of those core principles to managing up, giving feedback to a board, giving feedback to a donor, so people in intense positions of power
We'll be able to do that.
And I think we might put that into the mix.
But can I just suggest that in the interim, while those resources are going to be put online, my suggestion to you would be to find a mentor and or a coach. Coaches are expensive, go a mentor. For the price of a cup of coffee, practice. Practice what you want to say with someone, get them to exhibit different behaviours, and then practice in the moment what you would do to adjust what it is that you want to say.
I found that even addressing something in a really very reasonable, peaceful way has produced very emotionally volatile responses.
Yes.
So it's about dealing with adults who you kind of expect, but because it's so personal.
And sometimes the calmer you are, the more intense the response.
I think that is an interesting thing about the industry generally, and I talked about this with Kate Champion, who's sitting back there, when she was the AD of Force Majeure, and that because you are a very successful artist doesn't mean that you have the skills or indeed the desire to suddenly be in a leadership position within a company. And even if you do want that role, you don't know what it means to take on that role, and you haven't got the experience, and this is not talking to your position because you obviously created the company, but people who have been successful directors and then suddenly they're artistic directors, and what does it suddenly mean to be in a leadership role within an organisation? Or if you're a successful actor or writer and suddenly you're a director, what does it mean? And there are really zero learnings for those sorts of leaps. And so I think it's really interesting to hear what you talk about, the different kind of scripts and models that can be adapted. What we tried to do and what Kate tried to do at Force Majeure is actually, develop a career path potentially for people who were choreographers who might then aspire to have their own company, create associate directing roles so that people can have that experience of being within an organisation and understand the administrative and financial pressures that are suddenly on an artist who actually really what they wanted to do was make work, and what all of that means to be, applying for grants or responsible for other people when actually what you have only ever been responsible for is yourself and your art. And I think the industry is very poor at that. And increasingly, with the funding situation the Australia Council's just gone through, there doesn't seem to be light at the end of that particular tunnel for cash-strapped organisations to try and create those opportunities within them. I mean, I don't have easy answers there, but to try and develop pathways for organisations who are fortunate enough to be funded seems to me to be absolutely essential to ensure the sustainability of the industry that they claim to be so passionate about. So, kudos to you for having kind of formed your own company and taking on that responsibility for yourself and your peers. I just think that's incredibly impressive.
Joe and Kate, that sounds like an amazing thing. How many people were at Force Majeure when that was happening? Roughly, how many staff? Sorry.
Well, there was like part 1, 3 hours a week accountant, 3 days a week afternoons marketing, and 2 full-time positions.
Yeah, and so you were able to still create those networks.
Well, it's a choice you make. Yeah, I got a job somewhere else for 6 months, so we used that opportunity to have my wage as bring in an associate director to experience running the company.
Yeah, cool. I only ask because sometimes we have small companies who go, I could never do that, and I love just going, you're the powerful ones because you can make change so quickly. And I think it's great that there's that. Yeah.
Our size would have been, we wouldn't have been in the position had this certain situation not occurred. Yeah. But it was certainly a strong desire to create these pathways. But finding the way is very difficult.
And sadly, that person decided there was nothing they'd rather do less.
Backfired, but the idea was good. But that's like a creative development. Getting the chance to work out that that's absolutely not what they want to do. Thank God they had that opportunity.
Because there are a lot of people who find that out after they've got the job, and that would be even worse for a small organisation.
Yeah.
I mean, just on that point, I think that the only example I've seen of that done extremely successfully has been Patch. Patch Theatre Company is a children's theatre company based in Adelaide, and they had a continuous artistic director for 20 years, Dave Brown, and he knew well in advance that he was going to retire. He hasn't stopped practising, but he was going to retire from running the company. And they managed to somehow, I don't know how they did it, they employed a series of associate directors that so they had a whole bunch of people for 3 months. So they effectively were in the company making work for 3 months. So the company could decide whether they liked them or not. And so it wasn't about whether you did a kick-ass interview and you had an amazing job application. It was about who are you as a person, what are your ideas, how do you think this is, if this was your company, how would it run? And it was also an opportunity for that person to go, is this what you want to do? Is this the kind of place you want to be? And ultimately, as a result of that, they ran that process over 2 years. They had 4 or 5 people go through that process, and through that process, they found the right fit for them and for the person. And that's an extremely unusual situation.
It's interesting we're all talking about, people who are working in small companies or who are working on kind of productions and how you manage your managers or how do you manage the people that you're working with. But I wonder how this discussion kind of applies to a big role in the arts, which is that kind of freelancing role, like people who work completely outside of an organisation and maybe actually don't necessarily go into a theatre or a studio or anything, but do some kind of freelance work for arts organisations, maybe from their own home. Like I wonder how they can manage people, particularly when they're in such a tenuous position and may fear losing their livelihood if they confront.
We've got quite a few freelancers who regularly come to the Arts Wellbeing Collective, and I think what they find helpful is obviously the networking aspect of it. And I guess that's where it gets back to that similar response we gave to that lady regarding peer-to-peer feedback. But you're quite right, it's very different in terms of a power dynamic doing that if you are dependent on that individual for the next day's work.
Yeah. And yeah, something I found when I was freelancing too, I sort of thought it'd be a lovely break from working in an organisation, not being around all those politics, and then you forget that when you take on 7 contracts, you've just multiplied it by 7 sets of politics and 7 sets of managers who are reporting to boards, or artists who are, putting on a show, and you're freelancing doing marketing or doing whatever you were doing, and you actually end up multiplying the groups that you're working with, and sort of keeping all those balls in the air was something that I hadn't. Just the amount of people you have to then adjust your style for constantly was overwhelming.
Look, I wanted to ask a question about the space between, I suppose, which is about not the people who are actively engaged and probably highly networked or working within groups of people. And I know that we often say that, theatre people, performing arts people, that they are out there and they are engaged, but I happen to know that a lot sometimes aren't. And that a lot, if you are not currently working, where are you? You might be at home looking after the children. If you were me, you might have been stuck on a remote sand island on generator power, living with a group of toothless fishermen. And I hadn't been reminded of that experience for me as a jobbing actor when I first got married and I had children and I had to embrace motherhood, sobbing in tears to a choreographer friend of mine saying, I just don't know, I can't get this show written, I don't know what's wrong with me. And I had a 1-year-old baby at the time, and I was living on generator power in the middle of a sand island, and that, you sort of think, okay, not everybody has to go to that extreme to kind of find yourself in isolation, but heading up the theatre network for New South Wales, I'm often coming across people who are in that moment of isolation and through some good chance have come through to this and are just desperate for some sort of connection. Now that's fine, I can talk to them and you could put them into other roles, but for people who are not necessarily engaged in an organisation or even on a project or within those types of things, I am concerned as a professional about how they can get through those troughs with support that recognises their industry need. So it's not saying that it's not necessarily they're those troughs that occur within a professional spectrum. And I'm not saying I've got the answer. I just sort of wanted to fill the space in between for those people who may not be here tonight.
No, look, I think that's an excellent point. And I guess when I first went into that world of freelance is that, having been in a highly networked position and quite a powerful position at Sydney Theatre Company, clearly, you're suddenly aware, and I just became so much more aware of the day-to-day lives of the people who are freelancing and who have big periods of time between jobs, and you've got to fill in your day, and you want to feel productive whilst you're filling in your day. And you may say, oh, you don't have to do that, you can get another job, you can do something else. But even as you were speaking, I was thinking about, the industry relies on, the theatre industry relies on those people staying in the industry, because I mean I can't tell you how many times I've sat around in a casting room and thinking, well, who are the the middle-aged men of a certain time? And interestingly, for men, if you stay in the industry, if you can bridge those gaps, you will find when you hit about 50 that there's actually some roles because not many people do. And like Peter Howitz, for example, he just went his career went crazy when he came back into the industry because suddenly everyone was thinking, oh, Peter, yeah, you're great. And you got all this work, and he had been unemployed for years. But to come back in, so the industry needs to have people of all ages and backgrounds in order to be able to put the shows on stage. But what is happening to those people in, and I, that's the thing, I don't have any answers either, but to try and at least understand the isolation that you can have, particularly after you've been into the intensity of rehearsal room and suddenly that's gone, closing night gone, and now you've got no work until November next year. Yet the industry needs you to not take the full-time teaching job because in November next year they want you back on their stage. And it's a very uncertain lifestyle. And I guess that's what's interesting, and I was looking at some of your videos on the website about the sort of inherent anxiety that can come with that lifestyle. And it does seem that there aren't easy answers to that other than helping where you can, speaking about it, providing the support. But no one's going to suddenly say within Australia, let's have a working wage for all actors who improve in their professional work. I mean, they do it in Europe, but it doesn't seem on any agenda here that I've seen. So it's a challenge.
Yeah, I'd say the only other space that would be interesting, although it's a very, very long-term fix, is tertiary institutions. So equipping people at the earliest possible point for what to expect once they're into the industry and getting those skills in as early as possible. That would be one of the things to happen.
Do they talk about these kinds of skills? Because I know so many universities now, are developing degrees in creative management or like creative arts management, that sort of thing. I mean, it sounds like the kind of skills that you guys develop in artists should absolutely be taught in, entire courses at university level for those kinds of people. Is that happening?
I sort of more meant around the self-care stuff. Right. So around the, kids going through sort of acting courses and writing and things like that, and sort of that thing of you might be out of work for long periods of time. Here are some of the things that you can do to manage that and managing those things. I think it's a political challenge because, of course, you don't want the universities don't want to bring kids in and then go, hey, welcome to this $60,000 course. By the way, you're probably going to be out of work most of your life. And it's like, well, that's not a great value proposition for them. So there's a constant political battle
really
to
say.
But an ethical one, for
and
sure.
There was a point at which, like the Whopper in particular, I think did it first, where they started talking to students about and trying to equip them to do self-devised work, so that they weren't just sitting waiting for the phone to ring, but so it was about grant applications, and it was about the producing side of things and collaborating with your peers to which is why there was, and VCA did as well, and there was that little proliferation where whether it was the Haydock project and all those sorts of companies that all came out at the same time, and they just got on and did it. Again, underwriting the industry to a degree in their own training, but at least it's not just sitting waiting for the phone.
There's a question just here.
Just a contribution to that question you asked, because I'm part of we did the study of actors, health and wellbeing, so we asked the question of those who were actors who went through training, whether they did get training in these various areas. And many did get training in healthy lifestyle. Some got training in how to take care of their significant relationships, but a very low group for how to do financial management. So that was very telling, because another of our questions was, and what kinds of income are you earning? And from are you earning most of your income from acting work or from the ancillary work? And so we've done a lot of reporting on the balance and the mix of those things. Yeah. But I think a key outcome is we certainly are needing to have more discussion in higher education institutions around working strategies, financial management, that sort of thing, as well as the health and wellbeing things. I mean, I teach health of the actor in several private institutions at the moment, and I know there's also a program being offered at QUT, so it's being introduced now. Yeah. But it is also an issue. When I was in the UK a few years back, there was a great fear around if you tell people how difficult, traumatising, whatever, they all want to run away. But actually, Emma Thompson was at that gathering, and she said, no, you absolutely want to tell them how tough it can be and how exploitative it can be, so that they are going in with their eyes open and that they are prepared. Because their passion will keep them there probably anyway, but at least they've got their eyes open. So I think that's a helpful.
There was another question just here.
I've just got a question about how you encourage wellbeing as a key kind of value in a large organisation, at a leadership level.
Because it's about productivity. It has to be. So it actually has to be about how the organisation, so we all talk about things like discretionary effort. Discretionary effort can only come from a place of wellness. And you're only going to be well if you feel like you are being respected, treated appropriately. And this is where values and diversity and productivity are just so intimately connected. So it's really important, especially in large organisations. And if you go to Arts Centre Melbourne, to our website, we've got a great organisational statement called The Role You Play, which puts values into the language of the theatre. So we talk about being curtain up. We talk about earning the encore and what that actually means. And so you actually locate then wellness and well-being with the outcomes that you see from it. And the increased rates of commitment and engagement.
And the financial investment?
Absolutely, absolutely. And we've been able to demonstrate that. So we've done some work because if productivity is going to be the outcome, you have to be able to evaluate what you do. So in all the work that we do around culture, there are very clear metrics that we use, so that we are assessing and evaluating and being able to monitor where things are.
From an employee point of view, the key things that I see are the role modelling. So our executive team and our CEO, whom we love and adore, I see her living the values, and that means that I can live the values. I think that it just has to come from the top. But the other thing with the role you play, which is our organisational statement that has our values and things like that, because it's so supported and it's so kind of intrinsic, it allows you to call out bad behaviour against the values. So you don't have to, someone doesn't have to have done something really bad, or kind of like, I don't know, sent an email and not blind copied someone, or it doesn't have to be something actually a physical act, but you can say, I don't think that they're acting in line with our values. I don't think that they're doing the best thing, or something like that. So it does actually empower you in that way. But the other thing that I find is that if I'm in a situation where I have to make a decision and I, for whatever reason, can't bounce that off Sonia or off Claire, I believe that if I make it in line with our values, that I'll be supported, even if it's the wrong decision. And I think that's key. You need to feel safe to make a call, and if it's the wrong call, that Sonia's not going to fire me, hopefully.
So with our values statement, it's actually part of everything we do. It's in our policies. We've actually used it with the unions around our enterprise agreement negotiating table recently, and to the point that we even use it in our tender documentation. So when we're tendering for work, we say, if you're an organisation who wants to work with us, you need to know this is who we are and this is what we stand for. If that looks like the type of community you want to be part of, then let's do business.
Yeah. And as someone who's worked with a lot of value statements at different organisations, it is a slightly unusual value statement. It's not, you know how you, like, not to sound too cynical, but sometimes you pick up a value statement and you go, haha, transparency, accountability, respect, communication, got it. Yeah. And it's usually got a really quirky, you know, acronym. This one actually read and I went, oh, this is actually a bit different. It actually felt different and it felt more genuine. And that's why it works, I suppose, as well. Because it's more genuine. It's all well and good to have a values statement, you know, that's great, stick it on the fridge. But unless you're living and breathing it and it's true to you and it's true to the organisation, it's never going to work.
I'm mindful that we all want to have a glass of wine and some cheese and an opportunity to catch up with people. So we'll just take one last question. I think there was one up in the back corner.
Yeah. I really love the contribution to the panel. Thank you so much. I'm particularly appreciative of bringing the HR perspective and really making sure that our industry is the best that it can be. I felt really uncomfortable with the motherhood conversation because I come from the accessibility space, and when you have access requirements, you need to talk about them. And when you have them daily, it is something that you need to be proud of, and you go, okay, I actually need this in my workplace in order to do my job. In the accessibility space, we've been campaigning for decades around ramps, and we use our allies, mothers and parents with prams in order to get that built environment accessibility. So what I'm really interested in is joining your conversation and going and inviting you to look at the way that we talk about access requirements in order to feel better about being a mother in an arts workplace. Because it really is a bit sad, and I want to look up to my female people who've gone before me, because I want to be a mother, and I want to see mothers talking about their access requirements in a really valued way, so that we're all talking about access and a really good workplace to be in. Thank you. It's great.
Let's drink some wine and eat some cheese then. Thank you.